I think we'll get started. So, my name is Ross. You might know me as a staff member here in the Office of Admission at Columbia Journalism School. Thank you again for joining us to learn more about the part-time Master of Science, a really great program for people who want to get the full experience of getting, top-notch skills in journalism, but over a slightly longer amount of time, so you can potentially maintain a job while you're doing this curriculum. And we'll talk in detail about how that might look. And the great news for people watching this live right now is that there's still about 2 months to get an application done for our program. Our applications are due December 15th for this program. So there's plenty of time based on this conversation to continue your conversation with members of our team, with our faculty, and to learn more before you kind of need to submit. So hopefully there's no feeling of like, imminent rush to get this all done. So there's plenty of time to think things over, take the advice that you might get from this webinar and from future webinars, and put together hopefully a strong application for whatever program is the one that you want to apply for. But I'd like to welcome Elena Cabral, who's Assistant Dean of Student and International Programs, as well as the Director of the Part-Time Master of Science program, who will be talking in great detail about this, really great opportunity at the school. Welcome, Elena.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you all for being here. Um, I am a graduate of the part-time program. I went on to work for the Miami Herald, a job I got with help from the school, and did some stringing for Newsday. I was an editor at Scholastic, and I've actually been teaching here. This is my 20th year of teaching. I run our part-time program and do a lot of other things. This institution has meant a great deal to me, and running the part-time program is a big joy because I tend to be very biased. I think that being at the journalism school should last longer than 9.5 months, and the 2 years here are ideal, particularly for career changers, but really just anyone who wants to take advantage again of the student status and get to position themselves for what is really one of the most exciting careers that you can have and still get paid.
Great. And since you mentioned you were an alum of the program, can you talk a bit about why the part-time format made sense for what you were doing at that time and how that worked for you?
Yes, I'd always really wanted to be a storyteller, a journalist, but in undergraduate school, I actually attended Columbia U University as an undergraduate here and was this news editor at the school paper. But I just could not break through the door on my own as an unknown person with only my college paper. It was a really difficult process for me, and I knew from, just working, I worked at the Ford Foundation at that time, that the J school could really open doors for me in the sense that it would train me and it would actually make the introductions to these news organizations that, it draws to the school, on a daily basis. And so I knew also that with my college debt, my parents would probably kill me if I tried to go into a graduate program right out of a few years out of school. So this opportunity to do it on a part-time basis was ideal. It was incredibly rigorous. It was like having two full-time jobs. There were a lot of things that were given up along the way, like, weekends away or a night out with friends. But I always tell people that I can guarantee you whatever you give up to do this experience and, explore New York City like you never have before, even no matter how long you've lived here, um, was the most rewarding, exhilarating, terrifying experience of my life. But it was just the very best decision that I could have made with regard to my career. And also, personally speaking, because I knew at that point that having worked in an office from 9 to 5 and done the rat race in New York City, that I just didn't want to do that anymore. And I hear more and more from students that they too, especially after the pandemic, just don't want to have that existence, just want to be in the world, want to be involved and helping in whatever the way they can to influence or to have an impact on some of the biggest problems our country faces. And journalism really did give me that opportunity, particularly at the Miami Herald, and even now as an instructor, we're getting ready to cover the elections. We covered a very big story last year right here in our own backyard at Columbia, and our students learned so much, and it was just like being in a newsroom for me again. So I really do want to encourage the 2 year experience so that can last, for the many years after the election when there's going to be stories coming at us from every direction.
Great. And at the journalism school, you'll find that people in the full-time, the part-time program is a very diverse group of people from all sorts of different professional, educational backgrounds. But within the part-time program, what kind of maybe backgrounds do you see in a lot of the people who are in the part-time group, and what kind of goals might they have in terms of what they want to get out of the experience?
Well, I've just taught the reporting class to our current cohort of first year students, 19 of them. Many of them are career changers. Some of them, a few of them are right out of school. Some of them are Columbia University employees, which is always really great because they help our students kind of get situated within the great expertise of our institution. Some students are really not looking to pursue journalism in the way that we think of it, traditional journalism, but they want to become better communicators. They want to learn how to use data. They want to learn how to use investigative skills. They want to learn, just a number of things that we teach here that can be applied in any industry. But, it's sort of interesting because once we get our hands on them and we see a huge amount of talent, particularly in writing and reporting, um, we tend to try to push them into journalism experiences. But nevertheless, whatever they choose to do, um, whatever direction they go in that 2 year experience, I think is useful, as I said, in any profession.
Mhm.
But a lot of them, as I did, took the leap of faith, leave their jobs, their cushy jobs, and go sometimes with a bit of a pay cut to a news organization, maybe in a local newspaper, as I did in Miami Herald, or with a nonprofit newsroom. Um, and don't look back. They just they find the transition. It's sort of a baptism of fire into this, super competitive profession, really feeling like they not only have the tools they need, but they have the support they need because this investment is really not just about what you do in the classroom here, um, but the network that you are part of for the rest of your working life.
Great. And since I was mentioning to Elena before, like I think people usually would love to see some visuals of kind of what this experience looks like. So I'm going to share my screen now and take a look at some of the curriculum, so give you a better sense on how these 2 years actually play out, because it's kind of this abstract thing I think to kind of imagine what it would be like to be in the part-time program. But luckily, there's a visual that's very helpful that kind of maps out the whole experience. And Elena, you can help us kind of understand how that'll
Sure.
look. One second here.
So it is 2 years. You apply now, you find out in March, put your deposit down in May. You have the whole summer to rest and make nice with your employers and sort of get ready for the August session, which starts in mid-August. With reporting. That's the first module everyone has to take and pass it. We just finished my reporting class yesterday, actually, and the students will then jump right into another module called the written word. And they choose from a variety of different themes, if you will, like profile reporting, writing for the ear, if people are inclined to do audio. You choose from those. And the good thing is that you're not taking these two classes at the same time. You're taking them back to back. So it's it's not it's still rigorous, but it's not overwhelming you with classes at night. And they are offered at night, but we like to tell you that this is not necessarily a night school. The flexibility of the part-time program is that it's stretched over 2 years as opposed to 9.5 months. But, there's a lot that goes on in our building, a lot of sessions, a lot of training sessions, career events, incredible speakers that you don't want to miss out on. And so what happens is you get an email at the beginning of the week on a Sunday evening that says this week at the J School, and you plan what your week looks like. No student, not the full-timers, not the part-timers, not even the fellows who are on campus can go to all of these events, but it helps you plan. Then you get a nice long break between mid-December and mid-January, again, to make nice with your employers and your spouses or your partners, or, just get back a little bit to life. But that's a really good time too to think about your spring semester. You will decide which spring course to take. Again, just one at a time. 15-week class called a seminar and production class. This class is called that because it has, you know, workshop, class speaker, really just kind of story development with your professor, but then you're producing. You could be producing a literary magazine, a broadcast, an audio, a magazine, just any number of things. And those are meant to help you develop your portfolio. Hopefully, you keep clips from the very beginning of your experience here because you want to have this portfolio of work to show potential employers. But that's the really that classes those classes are meant to be classes in which you have something to show at the end. And here are some examples: the art of the interview, an audio workshop. Some of these are a full day. And so I recommend sometimes that students wait until their second semester to do them
Mhm.
because you can save up your PTO. If you think of 15 weeks as 1 day a week, that's 2 weeks of vacation and change. And that's how I did it. I actually audited Sam Friedman's book writing class. I took that class for free, just sat in on it, but it was a full day. And he'd kick you out if you didn't stay for the whole class time, but it was well worth it. As you can see, some of these classes, like investigating healthcare, that one meets at 9, and that's by a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist named Charles Ornstein, who works for ProPublica. And there will and the investigative project too, right there, you'll see Walt Bogdanovich teaches that class and Bogdanich. And so there will always be options for part-time students to take, you know, a class, whether it's a sort of thematic or more medium based. Um, and Part-timers generally get what they want to take because if they can't take it and if it doesn't work with their schedule, they can't enroll. And so we really try to work with your schedule. And if you don't get into a class the first year, you get a second shot, like with that book writing class.
Mhm. And just to clarify, for part-timers, just by virtue of being in a part-time, it doesn't mean you have to take classes in the evenings. It's you really get the full menu of options, but it will depend, of course, on your own particular schedule and your own kind of conflicts that you might have with different, professional obligations.
Absolutely. If you are free or even close to campus and can come to an afternoon class or a morning class, all the better. Your master's project is done in the summer. This is a long form piece of journalism. Mostly students do like a magazine length, anywhere from 4 to 8,000 words, depending on the subject. But it can also incorporate some audio, multimedia, so half print, half audio, some print, some video. Sometimes students will do like a 20-minute podcast, sort of in the style of This American Life. Um, and it's not a class where you need to come to school for a classroom experience. You're doing it sort of independently with an advisor that you choose. Um, but you do have to take an ethics class that is a lecture class. It's called Critical Issues, and it meets over a period of several weeks over the summer. It's not a reporting class, so it complements the master's project very well. And let me tell you, in this sort of digital age, with misinformation and AI and you know, tricky interviews, all of the things that shape our industry. That ethics class is a really good class to take in order to orient yourself to how to do this craft in a very transparent and ethical way. When you come back in the set for the second year, you take a class called Investigative Techniques, which I hear from the part-timers gives you a whole range of tools, from everything from FOIA to how to use a myriad of databases, and even things like Google Maps or satellite images that are often used in high-level reporting to cover conflicts around the world, but also for doing climate reporting to sort of monitor deforestation and rising sea levels. It's really cool. And You can use that, with your reporting going right into the spring. The law class is essential. We call, in fact, these classes journalism essentials because you want to make sure that you understand your rights as a journalist, which can change from state to state. But will certainly help protect you, particularly in a moment when you might be apprehended unjustifiably for covering a protest, right? But you also need to know to protect yourself um, against lawsuits related to defamation or copyright infringement. And so we give you the latest information by some of the smartest people in this field of First Amendment law. Image and sound is a module that you take that's going to really help decide what kind of spring you're going to have because it's going to introduce you to a medium that you are drawn to. So you can choose from audio, video, data, or photography. And this kind of serves as a prerequisite for that final class, that seminar and production class. You saw some of the examples like video newsroom, city newsroom, um, the audio newsroom, um, where, you are putting into practice the craft of recording and editing, mixing in layers of sound, nat sound, but also music, you know, um, and archival material. It's really meant to be sort of a high level moment of production, which is why I think those full day production classes are something that you might want to wait until you are moving out of our program and getting ready during that spring semester to talk to recruiters. They want to see fresh stories, maybe not stories that are a year old, but things that you're working on right now.
Mhm.
They tend to really value our students' level of training, but also their news judgment. The idea that at this point in their training, they really understand what a story is, um, how to engage their audience. I worked in career development for 10 years, so I got to meet a lot of our recruiters. And I learned, over time that whether it's the New York Times or some startup podcast in Brooklyn, they're all really looking for the same thing. They want to see original reporting, stories you can't find anywhere else. They want to see an audience that is ever bigger, ever younger, and more diverse. And that's you guys, So uh, with all of um, the shrinking of news organizations, sadly, that cover New York, like the New York Times, no longer having a metro section, in some ways that's a benefit to our students because they alone are crawling around the city finding stories in a city that basically has a national international audience, and they break news. They can break news, uh, no, and no one more than our part-time students who are part of these communities, know them really well, can get around very well, and as New Yorkers have a lot of questions themselves that they're curious about. So it's an ideal scenario if you're willing to devote the time and if you're willing to really be bold, you know, do the things that they tell you not to do, like in subways, and make eye contact with people and ask questions, and sometimes, you know, um, ask questions that you don't necessarily do at a dinner party, like who did you vote for, or how much money do you make, and how difficult is it to pay your rent in this city, that sort of thing. Um, but I promise you that one of the things you learn as a journalist is that everybody really wants to tell their stories, especially at a moment like this when things are so divisive. Like, there are just so many questions that are so many issues that are really at stake in this election. And so we will have, no shortage of, my students themselves have been doing a really great job, looking at everything from um, um, clinics in New York City that purport to, for example, provide information for pregnant women, but are really anti-abortion clinics that have actually been sued by the Attorney General right here in Queens and Brooklyn and other parts of our city. Um, and just many other stories. I'm right in the middle of editing my students' final stories, and some of them will be featured on our Columbia News Service. One student is writing about how the return of early voting, something that Republicans, including, Trump, disavowed for a very long time, is coming back, and in a big way in New York in particular, in high stakes races, um, including one in Long Island, that could really help influence control of the House. Um, and so, it's an example of how our city really draws a national spotlight, but only our students are on the ground to talk to voters and provide a full picture.
And as people might be learning from this conversation, this is a little different than an academic, traditional kind of academic master's or graduate program. Because if you're working, you might have another type of program where, like on the syllabus, I have to read a book by next week, or I need to like
Mhm.
write a paper by the end of the term, and you have a very kind of very predictable set of like what your semester will look like. But for us, with reporting, how should a part-time student maybe approach like, this kind of real hands-on kind of training? What type of time should they have kind of put aside to do the reporting, to do the storytelling that will be necessary for these types of assignments that they'll get?
Well, as I said, the reporting class, the first class that you take, is probably the most intensive one, at least in the first year.
Mhm.
I have my students meet Monday, Wednesday from 6 to 9 p.m. And they all make it on time, even after a long day of I'm always amazed at their energy level. But they also have to reserve somewhere between 6 to 8 hours in their work week for reporting and writing. So that means that you are, looking for stories, because I'm not telling you what to cover. You find them, and they might be stories near where you live or near where you work. And you sort of have to factor in when to do those phone calls and interviews in the early morning, on your lunch hour, after work, or on weekends. So, generally speaking, the deadlines are every other week for these 1,200 word stories. We did two this semester, um, uh, where, there was a pitch that needed to be written in between those weeks. We have to really understand how to write pitches. Um, it's an essential part of it. So that bit of writing has to be based on your reporting as well. So it it's a it's a balance of work and life and school that, as I said, kind of feels like two full-time jobs, but is entirely doable, as well as the feedback that you get from your professors. We generally have office hours by appointment. So sometimes people are coming during the day. Sometimes we're having a Zoom call at 9 o'clock at night, but we make it work.
Any advice just for planning ahead if you were thinking seriously about this program for, conversations you might want to have with an employer or ways to kind of, get prepared for this really exciting experience, but one, as you've noted, is pretty demanding.
Well, sure. I think it is very important to have a very transparent conversation with your employer. Yesterday, one of our students from the second year was giving advice to our first years, and she, said that that her boss helped her choose the classes based on, which might be a little extreme, but based on the skills that she was learning and how they would be applicable in her job. The truth is, as I said before, I think every institution has a message. Every institution, whether it's a corporation, a nonprofit, or a government agency, needs people who can write well, who can communicate well, who understand how to use social media, who understand how to use a lot of our investigative tools, frankly. Um, and so that is an important thing to do, and also to cover, and also to explain the work, the class hours. That yes, you can take classes, most of the classes in the evening, but there may be events that you'd like to attend that would, also prof be professionally rewarding for you, um, and knowing that even when you can't physically be here, we have Zoom, we have recordings of some of our events. And as I said, no one can go to all of them. So, I think that, you know, really just making sure first that you can do the program, both financially and in terms of your time, is is a critical part of the process. The wonderful thing is that our admission, the application is open now. It's free, and it's the sort of thing that you can work on over time. We ask you to write a personal essay, a professional essay, a resume, letters of recommendation, writing samples. And guess what? You don't have to take the GED because we don't believe that that is a barometer for whether you can do this job. We give our own writing tests. So it's a pretty painless thing. And I have found that in the process, in my own experience, of writing that personal essay and the professional essay, which is not meant to be a regurgitation of your resume because we're asking for that. It's really just almost like a personal exploration about what you would do with this degree and what has been leading you to us to do this degree. And in sort of doing this application, I think you can sort of understand for yourself and maybe for your employer, if you plan to ask them for that letter of recommendation, why you're doing this and how it can help you in any career path that you choose.
That's a great point. And one thing just to note too, socially, I think the great thing about the part-time program is you have a very strong connection, of course, with your part-time cohort, but you get to know people both in both years of the part-time group, but also you get to know people in the full-time programs as well. So it's a very great way to network with kind of the crew that you enter with your part-time team, but also with tons of people from all over the world who are doing the MS or the MA or the MS in data journalism or the dual degree. And so it's going to open you up to a full kind of community here, and you get 2 years basically to get to know people across the
Mhm.
faculty and the student world too. So
Yeah.
another thing to note, just to expand a little bit on the master's project, Elena, that's a really great opportunity that summer term between the 2 years to do a pretty ambitious work of journalism. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of just the experience people will have with an advisor and some subjects that people have maybe delved into over the years for their master's projects?
Oh, yes. I mean, they do. This is one of my favorite things because I tend to really gravitate to long form narrative. I personally love stories that focus on something Malcolm Gladwell once called the best magazine writing being based on subcultures, of which there are many. We are ourselves are a subculture of New Yorkers as journalists with our own set of rules and vocabulary and so forth. And, one of our students this past year did a story about Sherpa people in Queens, which I had no idea that they were here. But with climate change and other factors, they've apparently moved into other areas to help, to use their skills to help people in other sort of like snow environments, in the US. So it's a fascinating thing that you only discover when you move around the city. Sometimes people will do think pieces about subjects like reproductive health, where they're really kind of diving in using data and experts to help illuminate an issue is something along the lines of something you would see in the Atlantic or the New Yorker. But I tend to, as I said, really enjoy stories that are certainly about, a major election or climate change, but that really drill down to, the human experience. Um, and having the right type of writing coach, someone, for example, like Kevin Coyne, who's one of our very best writing coaches, to guide you along that, understanding the elements of a good story, a great lead, a great nut graph, terrific quotes, um, is, how uh, you make this project really something that is your capstone, something that you can be wedded to for the whole summer and be passionate about from beginning to end. Very often, they don't always work out the way you think. Sometimes students have to pivot to entirely new subjects, just like in a real newsroom or in a magazine setting. But they get across that finish line, and in a lot of cases, they will freelance these pieces to news organizations, digital, podcasts, any number of outlets.
Mhm. Great. And one thing we didn't note at the beginning, but is this true for all of our programs, whether they're full or part-time, is that our grading system is pass-fail here. So it gives people, I think, a little opportunity to try new things, explore things outside their comfort zone. I think generally the only ways to fail are to plagiarize or to not turn your work in and not, explain why you're missing deadlines. So it's very hard to do actually achieve a failure. So it's a place where you definitely try things and not always feel like you've hit exactly what your strengths are, but to like learn from the things that go really well, but also the things that maybe don't quite come together the way you wished. So it's kind of a great environment to try things, I think, in a way that maybe other academic programs might not be. So Elena, I thought before we get to questions, I'm going to open up the chat in a moment for people who want to raise some to us. I'll just share
Mhm.
a few more visuals here just to help people better understand the classroom experience here too. This is just a sense of some of the classes that we offer. So, like in the spring, on the lower left corner, that's Video Newsroom, which is a class we mentioned earlier, which is one where you get to use our broadcast studio on the fifth floor to develop a full, weekly TV news broadcast show. And the people here are getting great advising on how to anchor a broadcast, but you also rotate through other roles. You're the anchor, you're the producer, you're the correspondent out on the street. On to the right is a class called was it Audio Workshop, which is similarly a radio version of that, where you do a weekly news show in an audio format, kind of like an NPR or a BBC style show, and use our great, facilities to do that. On the upper right, that's magazine. Sorry, no, that's the Memory Project, a class where you create a book and write chapters of that with Professor Michael Shapiro. That's really been popular over the years for people who want to do more long form work. And to the left, on the upper left, is Professor Doolin Tu and Dean of Academic Affairs Doolin Tu, teaching students how to do short documentaries and a multimedia storytelling class. So those are just some examples of some of the things you might be able to do either in the full or part-time programs here. And yeah, we could probably spend another hour talking about all the different classes in more detail, but that's just a little sense of what it looks like to be in our classrooms and spaces doing the work. And then, Elaine, I thought I'd ask a bit about where some of our alums have gone on to, work or what they've done with this, particular training. And so I have a few slides of people we can kind of go through and talk about a few. I think this is Chloe Shaken here, who graduated a couple years ago. She won one of our reporting grants when she graduated and just had her story that she did with that on the front page of the New York Times, I think just a couple days ago, which was pretty exciting.
Yes. Our
And
postgraduate fellowships are a wonderful way to extend your training here. You can do some deep dive investigative work with the help of an editor with in conjunction with a news organization. But instead of paying us, we pay you. So it's a way of transitioning into newsrooms vis-a-vis these projects.
then And then in the world of audio, we had a recent alum, Jordan Gonsalves, who has started a new podcast called But We Loved, about stories about untold stories of queer history, which he launched relatively recently and was, learning a lot here at the school, I think, about both the business side and the audio side of storytelling.
Oh, that looks great.
Yeah. And then we had graduate from a couple years ago as well, Anna Muto, who's been doing a lot of really interesting investigative stories in different types of publications. And she had a major story in the Wall Street Journal, I think last year, about looking at kind of motherhood and the risks that mothers are facing in the US from different things, whether it's health or economic factors. So she's been very, successful at really shedding light on these really, important issues in the US. And then we have, if people know the movie or the book Nomadland, won the Oscar for Best Picture a few years ago. It was based on this book by Jessica Bruder, who's also an alum of the part-time program, and she also has advised master's projects and has taught after graduating from the program too.
Oh yes, that Jessica's experience is so classic in terms of the kind of attention you get here because that story, started out of a out of a class that she took with Dale Maharaj, one of our award-winning, professors, who really illustrates the very close attention that you get because that story then went on to become a magazine piece and in doing the immersive reporting with a subculture of people who go on the road because they've sort of been kicked out of the economy um, and you drive across the country looking for gig work. Um, Dale, I interviewed him for prior to the Academy Awards, and he told me about how he helped trick out this van that Jessica bought to go with these people, putting in the hot plate and all these other things. And he said, like when he saw her driving away, he was like, "Please God, don't let anything happen to her." And he was with her along the way in the sense that she called him on the road to talk about what she was reporting on, which character she should use, just a lot of decision making along the way. And he was right there with her. And I think that illustrates a lot of the care and attention and real investment that our faculty put into our students.
Right. And then we had Shamari Wills, who has written a book that's been very popular and well reviewed called Black Fortunes about the first six African Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires in the U.S. And I think he's an alum of that book writing class you mentioned as well, too.
Yes, yes.
Mhm. And we also have some people working in broadcast, like Jean Carlos Estrada, who's in CBS Austin. And let's see, another
Yes.
very well-known face if you watch CBS Mornings, Vladimir Duthiers, who's a grad of the part-time program as well. And you can see people all sorts of different mediums working all over all over the industry now with this training. And then people who've started their own kind of organizations too, like Thomas Brennan, right, who started the War Horse. So he founded that, and that does work around I think writing about is it armed forces and war related issues.
Right, right. This is a wonderful illustration of the ever expanding world of nonprofit journalism, which to me, I think is very much the future of our industry, to the extent that many of these collaborative projects by nonprofits, people, or groups that sort of pool their resources together to work with multiple agencies to do, really groundbreaking work, is not only valuable for our industry, but valuable to our students. Because if you take out loans to cover the tuition for this program, and when you graduate, if you go to work for a nonprofit news organization, which range from NPR to ProPublica to the War Horse and many, many others, you can apply for up to $50,000 of that tuition back through our loan repayment program, which is something you should check out on our website, which is a really great way to get some fantastic experience, a lot of guidance with editors and some of our former faculty even, and diminish that debt.
Hmm. Great. And similarly, another alum who started a kind of organization called Story Saver, Joseph Quaterer, which is something where I think this is an organization that helps people share their stories and is like a way to kind of commission storytellers to like shed light on people's lives or other issues they want to.
He uses a big stable of writers to do these stories for clients, and then he also has kind of a book imprint essentially. It's sort of a book publishing business with high profile people that he also puts together with, I guess you would refer to them as ghostwriters. Um, and he knew, like in his first week at J school, that he didn't want to do traditional journalism, but he stayed and got a lot out of it that helped him use his financial background to launch these businesses. Similarly, um, you know, um, Vladimir Duthiers left that, Wall Street after 17 years in his 40s to do this program. And, of course, now has this incredible career, but a lot of it had to do with the connections that he made because not even his fancy Wall Street buddies were going to really put him at the level he wanted to be in this business. So he
Hmm.
depended a lot on career development and even his own professor who introduced him to Anderson Cooper while on a tour of CNN.
Hmm. Great. I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat. If you have any questions, please pose those to me, Ross, in the chat, and then we'll see which ones we can get to in the remainder of the webinar. But before that, I thought I'd ask an important question. You touched on this already, Elena, about what you look for in, say, essays for the program. But overall, what kind of stands out to you in an application, whether it's for the part-time program, for any program here, when you're reading applications, what things do you kind of recommend people focus on when they're putting together their materials?
Well, you should know that the people who read your applications are not this like tweed wearing admissions, Ivy League crew we pull out of a closet. They are our faculty. They're journalists. So, if nothing else, they appreciate a good, well-told story. And they also know that life is messy. And so, when you talk about your story, your personal story, it's really good just to kind of be very open about experiences that shaped you, that made you the person that you are. And it doesn't even need to be journalism related or anything. It just could be something, because I think that I find it fascinating when I find out that some of our students have these incredible immigration stories or have overcome just, sometimes incredibly difficult circumstances to get where they are, and or have a really interesting connection to New York City history or some other part of the world. Um, and it makes sense, sort of like why they're sort of drawn to storytelling in that essay, and in the professional essay. As I said, I think that all of us, have found our way to the J school because sometimes out of frustration, sometimes out of, just a longing to do this, but because of student debt and other financial pressures, we ended up in communications or marketing or some other business that's sort of close to it, but not at all, as fulfilling as we would like it to be. And that's okay. But I think also an understanding of what you would like to do with this degree is always helpful. It's not cemented in stone, this plan. It can change as you're here. But uh, uh, that dream of yours, that you sort of like been holding on to for a while, this is your moment to express it. The writing samples and everything, and the writing test and the essays taken together will be our way of really being able to see that you can write well. Not, like Ernest Hemingway necessarily, but, we don't like to see a lot of grammar mistakes and, you know, um, misspelled words or misidentified people, because we would like to assume you've already gotten that training. Our hope is that we can teach a higher level of writing. And when I say that, I mean, no matter where you are, I thought I was a pretty good writer. And then I got my first story back and it was just like bleeding in red ink. And I realized I actually did have a lot to learn, but it was a little painful. But Sam Friedman, my professor who teaches the book writing class, always said, that pain you feel is sort of akin to when bodybuilders are working out, or even maybe you haven't been to the gym for a while and you do a little exercise and you get that soreness. That's actually your muscle tissue breaking down so you can build it back up again. And that's a great metaphor for what we do with your writing. Um, but we'd like to see that, you have a pretty good foundation to work with.
Mhm. Great. I see a question here that's somewhat common in terms of people that are reaching out to us, maybe as they're just learning about our school, which is what's the difference between the MA program with a science concentration and the MS program, Master of Science? So, just to quickly go over that, the MA program is a program for experienced journalists who want to go deeper into one of four areas, and one of those is science journalism, so writing about climate, environment, medical issues. But that's for people who are more experienced. And then the MS, even though it's called Master of Science, isn't a science degree. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily focusing on science necessarily. You could in that program, but the MS is a program that's very broad in the sense that in the full or part-time program, you can report on a wide range of issues, whether it's, science or not. It could be business, sports, politics, arts, anything within it. And the MS program, part or full-time, is open to people who are not necessarily experienced in journalism yet. So if your early career, if you've not had any real journalism, under your belt, the part-time MS or the full-time MS would be the best fit for that. But then they have another question about data and kind of data visualization. If you're interested in data work, are there areas in the program that they could, learn more about that if they're taking the part-time program? I know, of course, there's data in the image and sound as an option. And
Yeah.
I believe there's some, computation or data related classes that are in those spring seminar and production opportunities usually every year.
Exactly. And there's also a way certainly to do science reporting and not be an MA student. Our dean, Jelani Cobb, has really pledged to and done a lot to infuse our curriculum and our many other activities like the postgraduate fellowships in climate reporting. We know that we like to say that all journalists eventually are going to be climate reporters in some form or another. And so we really want to be a leader in preparing our students to cover this, whether it's from the business side, sports, fashion even. This is a topic that is the biggest story of our lifetimes and affects everything that we do. So insofar as news organizations recognize this and want to hire people who can tell these stories in an accessible way with multimedia and help grow this audience and raise awareness about the climate crisis, this is a good place to do it.
Mhm. Great. Just a quick question. People are wondering about applying for financial aid. Yes, there's a separate scholarship application, whether you're applying to the full-time or part-time program. It has actually been open now, so you are able to potentially start that. If you go into our application portal, you can select Scholarship 2025, and you can start to complete that, and there'll be instructions about all those steps. We'll also be holding some webinars soon on our team side that will explain a bit more about how to go through that process. So stay tuned for that. So definitely, that'll be something to we'll continue to touch on in the next few weeks. So no worries if you haven't started it yet. There'll be plenty of time for that as well. A question about application things. We won't get into every detail about that. I see a few questions specifically about ins and outs of application. For writing samples, just a question if people have writing samples that are maybe, not from the last year, maybe not even from the last couple of years, is it okay if a sample is, further back than a few years in terms of, its actual publication date or when it was actually done?
Oh yes, we really want your very best work. I would say, 5 years might be the cutoff point, because we change and evolve so much in 5 years. And topics, and we actually improve over time, you know what I mean? So, or the expectation is that you do. And so I think, fairly recent last 3 years would be a good time frame. And it doesn't have to be a journalistic thing. Some students have given us all sorts of items from papers they wrote in school. Someone who wrote scripts for the Comedy Central sent scripts that were sort of reported stories on news, like the Daily Show kind of thing that were fascinating and based on reporting. And of course, it's not just print. You can just send us links to some of, audio projects you may have done. You can send us photographs that you may have taken as part of a journalistic type of exhibition. And, just really anything that you consider to be your very best work.
Mhm. Another quick question. This is just about application again. If we have a policy now that if you are 5 years or less out of your last academic degree, we ask for at least one of your three recommendation letters to be from a faculty or an academic advisor. So that's the case. So if you are more than 5 years out of school, you can choose to include a faculty member. Definitely, that's fine, but you don't have to. But if you are 5 years or less out of your last degree, you would need a academic reference letter amongst those three. So that's just the policy for that. And then you can definitely reach out to our admissions team if you have more, like, again, specific questions about the application anytime or about the educational financing process as well. Oh, an important question, Lena, about international applicants to this program, the part-time program. Generally, international students will likely need to be doing the full-time unless they have a special visa. For most people who are here on a student visa, which is what most people would be on if they're coming from another country, it's not possible to do the part-time with a student visa. So for that reason, I would say there's a small number of people who are international in the program, but most people will be U.S. citizens or permanent residents in the part-time.
Right. We do have one in the part-time program now who works for the United Nations and is from Germany, who's doing well, but it's a challenge because she also has to travel. It's very rare.
hmm So definitely, but the full-time program is very much where most international students will be. There's a large number, almost half of our incoming full-time class is international. So that is a very common program for people who are coming from another country and want to do, this, excellent, training course here at the school. And then another question here about accommodation. So I think generally for people who are admitted to our school, there are some options to explore if you're not already living in the New York area. So that would include, some links you would get as an admitted student about ways to look for different accommodations here. There's something called the Columbia Off-Campus Housing Authority, which helps you look for sublets, looks for, people who are, looking for roommates, all that sort of stuff. And then a lot of our students, whether they're coming into the full-time or part-time, will likely start networking with each other just organically once they're admitted, starting to find out who else is coming to the school school and reaching out on Facebook or WhatsApp or different types of platforms and finding people who might want to become roommates or start to scout for places. So that's usually how that takes place. For the part-time program, usually, actual Columbia housing is usually limited and usually not too commonly available for the part-time class, but it all works out if you start
Oh,
planning it.
yeah. Yeah, it's always amazing. They come from all over the world. And just in sort of like looking at apartments all over the city, not just on the Upper West Side. I just happen to like the ones on the Upper West Side near campus because you spend a lot of time on campus and you'd like to sort of be able to walk and edit a video at 11 o'clock at night if you needed to. But the apartments up here are pretty big. It's kind of interesting. Someone will say, "Oh, I have a Washington Heights place with 3 bedrooms and 2 baths," and I'm kind of like, "Ooh, really? How many square feet is that? I might be interested in buying it." But yeah, and it's wonderful because you're matching up with your peers and maybe even graduate students from other parts of the university. And I just love the idea after a few years of being out of college, of coming back into a graduate program where you get all the perks and privileges of student status, all the things that we took for granted and didn't take advantage of as undergraduates, you now have discount tickets for theater and plays and operas, eligibility for scholarships, fellowships, internships, things of that sort, and having access to some incredible databases here that you can only get with that Columbia ID that help expand your reporting, help you learn about the world, at a moment when you're really in a very serious place to take advantage of it. Our faculty really have a warm place in their heart for our part-time students because they know how busy you are. They know that you come to this with a lot of maturity, understanding of the way the city works, and a great deal of talent. And so, it's a big source of pride for me to hear from professors about how well the part-timers are doing.
Mhm. Great. And one last question. So, yes, people might have heard or went to our other webinars about the Stabile Investigative Program specialization and the documentary specialization, which are great opportunities. Those are available only in the full-time format, but for people who are interested in learning more about investigative skills or taking those investigative classes that Elena talked about in the spring, or even, short video or documentary filmmaking classes, all of those are potentially available in the part-time curriculum too. You wouldn't have that same focused seminar that the specialization students would have for those two, but there's a lot of great exposure and opportunities to learn more about investigative or documentary or both in the part-time program.
And you can audit classes too. Full-timers don't generally get to do that a lot, but part-timers can just ask a professor, who's like Charlie Ornstein, who's teaching about investigating healthcare, and say, "Can I just sit in on your class?" And that's really all it takes. You don't have to fill out any forms. You just need to get the professor to say yes, and you sit in on it for free.
Mhm. Pretty good deal, definitely. Well, great. I think that's it for the questions I see right now. So thank you everyone for staying up, after work, potentially to talk with us. And we hope to continue the conversation. Elena had kindly put her email in the chat, so you're welcome to reach out for questions about part-time. I put in the link to reach out to our team if you wanted to talk more about the application or about the educational financing, all that good stuff. So there's plenty of time, happily, to continue chatting with us before applications are due, which is December 15th for the part-time program. So plenty of time to get that all going and to listen to Elena and other people and make sure that you're putting together a strong application if this is what you'd like to do, potentially starting next year. Well, thank you again. Have a great evening or rest of your day, and look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.